We hear about billionaires all the time, right? But what about trillionaires? Today, we're going to go on a little journey through time to figure out who was truly the richest person to ever live. And I think the answer is going to surprise you.
So, let's just get right to it. The big question. When you think of the wealthiest person of all time, who pops into your head? Seriously, take a second. You got a name? Okay, let's see if your guess holds up.
For a lot of us, that person is probably someone from our own time. A tech giant like Jeff Bezos. And yeah, their wealth it's just staggering. It's really hard to even wrap your head around. But believe it or not, they're just the opening act for our story today.
To find our first real contender, we've got to travel back. I mean, way, way back to the 14th century. We're about to meet a ruler whose personal spending could literally reshape an entire region's economy. Now that might sound like an exaggeration, but I promise you, it is not. Can you imagine being so rich that just by being generous, you could wreck an entire economy? We're talking about a guy whose spending on a single trip caused a decade-long financial crisis because he flooded the market with so much gold that the metal itself lost its value. That's a level of wealth that is it's wild.
His name was Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Malian Empire. His fortune wasn't in stocks or crypto, it was in pure gold, and he had unimaginable amounts of it. On his famous pilgrimage to Mecca, he spent and just gave away so much gold that he crashed its market value in major cities like Cairo for years to come. The man literally had too much money.
So Mansa Musa's imperial wealth is one way to get there. But that's just one path. Now let's switch gears and compare two totally different ways to build a massive fortune. The power you get from controlling an entire empire versus the power you get from dominating a single global industry.
On one side, you have an emperor, Caesar Augustus. His personal piggy bank was basically the entire Roman Empire's economy. And on the other side, you've got an industrialist, John D. Rockefeller. He built his fortune by getting a near-total chokehold on one of the most important resources in the world.
People often call Rockefeller the richest self-made man of the modern era. And that's key. He didn't inherit an empire. He built one from the ground up, an empire of oil.
90%. Just let that number sink in for a second. At its peak, Rockefeller's company Standard Oil controlled 90% of the entire world's oil supply. That kind of market domination is something we can barely even imagine today.
Rockefeller's fortune was absolutely huge. There's no question about that. But how does that compare to someone who didn't just control an industry, but who personally owned a giant piece of an entire empire's economy?
And that right there brings us to Caesar Augustus. Historians have tried to estimate his personal net worth, and the number they came up with is around $4.6 trillion in today's money. At one point, he personally owned all of Egypt. Think about that for a minute. Not owning a company in Egypt, owning Egypt itself.
All right, so how do these fortunes really compare? Let's put them all side by side. It's time to see how today's biggest fortunes measure up against the titans of history.
Okay, let's actually see this. First up, we've got the wealth of a modern giant like Jeff Bezos, an incredible fortune by any measure we have today. Now look, next to him is John D. Rockefeller. His wealth just completely dwarfs it. But then there's Caesar Augustus. And his fortune, it's not just a bigger bar on the chart. It's on a completely different planet. It really redefines what the word rich can even mean.
So what this all really shows us is that maybe we need to look at wealth through a totally new lens. Maybe rich is about way more than just a number in a bank account.
Here's the key difference. The biggest fortunes in history weren't just about assets. They were about having direct control over a huge percentage of a state or an empire's entire economy. For them, wealth and state power were exactly the same thing.
So, let's break it down. Are modern tech billionaires? As rich as they are, they're not the richest people in history. Not even close. The greatest fortunes were built differently, through absolute control of state resources like Mansa Musa, or an industrial monopoly like Rockefeller, or just straight up owning an empire like Caesar Augustus. And honestly, the sheer scale of that kind of wealth is almost impossible for us to comprehend today.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If the greatest measure of wealth in history has really been about control, economic control, then who, or maybe what, truly holds the most power in our world today?